So I know you are a long-term friend and colleague of Karl Zerbe. So can you tell me a little bit about when you first met him and how you met him?
Well, I had met him in that I was with the Junior Women's Club and I was in charge of openings.
Okay.
And then suddenly Puckett decided that I couldn't apply to be an artist because I'd never taken a lesson. And I tried to explain that to him. And he said, no, you've got to take at least one course. So I took the course. I was to paint, just sit there and paint. George didn't care what I did. And then George said, we have to have an exhibit. So I had to paint a painting. So I painted this painting and it didn't quite work. And I looked around and I saw on the floor a piece of cardboard, mat board. And I looked, that's fine. So I traced it out and put it in. And the picture went up. I've kept it all these years.
Really?
Because I'm sitting very innocently at the bottom of the stairs in LeMoyne, and in he comes with his big legs, plunk, 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 grabs my arm, pushes me up the stairs, points at my little piece of cardboard and said, what's that? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know, but it needed something. And we were the best of friends after that.
Really? So he was kind of an imposing person?
He was a big person.
Okay.
He was tall. I mean, he had very long legs. He was very outgoing.
He was outgoing, okay. So
One day they came, he and his wife, to the house, and I opened the door, and they had all these blue mushrooms. We just wanted to show you the mushrooms.
So he lived close by?
We lived fairly close.
Okay.
And because of that, when there were problems, and for instance with his estate, having to do all the cataloging of his work and so forth, I would go. They'd pick me up, Puckett would pick me up, and I would be the running person.
Okay.
And that's how I knew her, and why when she came back home to die, my husband was also doing the same thing, and the hospital was empty, and I'm looking after him, and the nurse said, do you know Mrs. Zerbe? I think I've seen your name. And I said, yes. And I went, and the whole room seemed, it was like a movie, seemed empty. And here she is alone in this bed, dying of cancer. So I went up and took the magazines I brought for my husband and gave them to her.
Oh, that's nice.
Then, 2 days later, I get a phone call. There is a car in your driveway. Get in it.
Oh.
And I came to her room and sat on a chair beside her, raised my hand and said, I will always promise that there will be a public collection of Karl Zerbe's work. It has been very intimate, and it wasn't until I came into some money that I could do something. And by then, Maria's more settled. She's not still out west. And so I asked her what she had, and she said, well, we have these works on civil rights that nobody's interested in.
The Civil Rights Collection.
And that
wow.
started it there,
Okay.
then and there. And then the collection grew when my daughter phoned and said, somebody is putting on photos for Tallahassee, and they're showing sit-ins and people being drug off and so forth. And so she bought them.
Okay.
And we kept it that. And that is why we have one of the few collections of what went on here. What happened was we look at an older Zerbe, and he has already had a heart attack, and he's home. And his wife says to him, why don't you be like other people and watch television? So he did. And then he saw the jailing, the women in the jails in Albany, Georgia. Georgia. He could paint Georgia, and that's what his contribution ended up being. And that's the first that I started the collection with, was the jailing. And he was very careful.
Okay. How do you mean?
He survived the Germans. He knew how to
Right.
be careful.
How did the Germans treat him? I know that he was, targeted for his artwork, but that was why he left
He
Germany,
had
right?
come to Boston area and then gone back.
Okay.
So he had that to aim for. But his style had already been noticed. And then he just kind of rose through the ranks, and he abolished the old system.
Okay.
He threw out all these plaster figures that they would draw. And then he turned around and painted them broken.
Interesting.
But he is very, very well thought of in the Boston area.
Sure.
He came to Tallahassee not to paint, but to set up an art department. And then he taught painting and continued on faculty at in that position.
Did you ever take any of his courses?
No, but I was interested in birds, and he was interested in birds. And
The St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge inspired him quite a bit with the birding, correct?
right, but wherever he went, he
Wherever he
birded.
went.
He was really an ornithologist.
Where do you think he got all of his creative energy and ideas? He was clearly very innovative. Did he have somebody that he was inspired by, or these ideas just came to him?
I think he just was.
Okay.
You come that way.
So you mentioned that you were close friends with Karl Zerbe and his wife, but can you tell me a little bit more about your relationship with him and LeMoyne?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples,
Okay.
because we're here in the garden, and our first director, Mr. Puckett, had to get away from all these women, and he loved gardening, and he would be out here pulling weeds. Karl would go, this would be on Saturday, Karl would have gone into the university early, had his coffee, done some painting, and then come home for lunch. And he would stop by and talk to Puckett.
Okay.
And I think that the fact that we were interested in nature, that we were trying to create this British garden,
That appealed to him a lot.
that appealed to him a lot, and that we didn't know what we were doing, but we were charging ahead. and it just, we were just very precious for him, and where he could bring his paintings.
Right.
And some of them, he started using Hebrew newspapers, and I'd never seen this kind of writing before, and just little things. But he just enjoyed it, that we were charging fearlessly ahead, and accepted everybody. That was very important to him too.
But he was very experimental with materials and whatnot. Do you know what he preferred, if he had a favorite? What was it?
Well, he kind of just grabbed something, you know.
I think you told me once that he painted with leaves.
Yes. What they did was they used a piece of equipment that's now archaic. It was the big thing at the time, and you could dry things.
Okay.
You know, you turn on, plug it in, and dry items. And so he dried the leaves,
Okay.
and then he glued them on with paint. Later on, he was doing the Ladies of the Night of Miami, and he was frustrated. And his wife called him off to where they had a dry goods store to help her, and he went wandering off, and he found these brocades. And he came running up and bought all of them. And then
Some fabrics.
he cut them up, and that was the clothing. And he used that brocade material in a lot of things. Different things just caught his attention. In terms of segregation, he went to Jamaica, and he noticed that everybody got together, but then they separated out. And so the relationship was different than it was here. And that and his writing and his paintings all happened just as everything exploded. And so he was right there. But he always was interested in what was going on around him. And that he felt was his kind of subject matter, but that he was a chronicler. Well, he did have a very important part in experimental things, and that was with paint. And paint companies would send him their product, and he would test it. I don't know how he got into that. Some passed and some didn't. But he was always looking for something that would go faster, would dry quicker. Because so then he could do more and more and more.
That makes sense. So he didn't love painting with oils.
His work is primarily layered. As I said, he would tell you that he painted what went on around him. And that was his interest. But he was a chemist. That was his trade and education or whatever. And so that's how he got to be experimental with the paints. And he was the first to use acrylic paint, in a sense, of usage. But they did send it to him. But he was always pushing, always pushing. Pushing.
So you were just about to say something about his time in Jamaica. What was that influence like for him?
Well, he noticed that people were together. They put on plays together, but they ate separately. And that there was a different feeling about things. You have to remember he was in Boston. And New England. And he painted doors with signs on them. He did a lot of painting, but he was always very careful.
To not offend?
No, I think it's just this feeling that the Germans are after you.
Really? So that was
I've always felt that way. Once you feel that someone's after you, you are more aware of it.
Gotcha. So what did he think about living in the South?
I think he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the weather. Helped his arthritis. And the birds.
And the birds.
And the fact that people were friendly.
Okay.
I think that was probably a big change for him.
Was he a friendly person?
Very outgoing.
Okay.
And I don't think he needed people.
Okay.
Not that kind of to do.
Well, he was pretty focused on his work.
Well, and he was a good teacher.
Okay.
And I think he's known today as a good teacher. And he came along at a time when America was just starting with these museums, and he's in many, many museums.
Right. Do you have a favorite collection or piece of his?
Well, I did have.
Oh. What do you mean?
Well, I always thought of him as this bird as being Zerbe in his pajamas, and it was used a lot right before he died. And so when the painting became available, I bought it for LeMoyne. It just really reminded me of Zerbe in his pajamas.
Really? That's funny. I don't know if I'll ever look at it the same way now. What do you think is important for people to know that aren't familiar with Karl Zerbe and his work? What do you really want them to know about him and his influence and impact?
I think I do like the idea that he was a chronicler, that he did paint what was around him. He didn't paint something artificial.
Okay.
And he was very much aware of the social issues, and was somewhat careful about that. But he was very involved in the emotions at the time. I think you still, and then he also saw what happened to his fellow artists in Germany, and how some of them lived under house arrest. And I think he always just looked over his shoulder.
Right. How old was he when he left Germany? Do
I
you know?
I haven't put that in.
I can look it up, but he was a grown artist at that point, correct?
He had shows.
Okay.
His work was declared unsuitable.
Right.
And so it was just, if they burned your work, they'll burn the artist.
Right.
And that's how he up and left.
How do you think his work continues to be relevant moving forward?
Because abstract art comes and goes. And the people who put some humanism into art have remained. He had to have something that he saw, he felt, he was very tactile.
Right. Do you have any favorite memories, like one or two, that you think of when you think of him?
Well, we had the one with Dean drug upstairs, but he had a house that was on a hill, and I had to deliver something to him. And so I'm in my car on top of the hill, and he comes out and he said, "Well, can I sell you a painting?" I said, "Well, I don't have any money." "Well, I just can't sell these things." And woof.
No. Did he struggle to sell his work when he was alive?
Well, he painted these prostitutes, and you know, that's not everybody's cup of tea.
Fair enough. Why do you think he wanted to paint them?
Because they were downtrodden.
Okay. So he liked a little bit of scandal.
He was interested in the people on the fringe,
Okay.
that society didn't. He was very careful. But and very open. So, and he got his work out there. He's in, what, 100 galleries? So. But he just remained true to himself. I think that was the key to him.
He was a pretty prolific artist. He was constantly working,
Oh,
correct?
he's a good German. He worked every day. Yes, he would tell you that.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes, this is my work.
Well, you've dedicated quite a bit of your life to preserving his work and making sure people know about it and see it.
Well, it's been in later years. I realized that it was very simple. We make Zerbe, he makes us.
Was there anything else you want to share about him and his memory and influence, what he meant to you?
I will think of it tomorrow.
Fair enough.
I think that his work will continue to hold meaning.
Just want to thank you for what you've done for LeMoyne and for taking the time to talk about this very influential artist. I know that he was important to you and you made this really special promise, and I'm glad we've had a moment to talk about it.